77 WABC and Bergen Newbridge Medical Center honor the life of legendary broadcaster and our friend, Ernie Anastas.
Hi, it's Ernie Anastas. You know, your thoughts can affect how you feel. Bergen Newbridge Medical Center is the largest hospital in New Jersey, providing comprehensive, equitable, compassionate, and high-quality emergency inpatient and outpatient medical care, plus mental health services and substance use disorder treatment. The Bergen Newbridge team can address your total health needs in one convenient location. Call 201-225-7130 for an appointment or newbridgehealth.org.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And I'm Jake Novak in for Roger Stone this evening. However, around 8:30 Eastern Time, Roger Stone will be joining us by phone. So if you tuned in for Roger, please stay with us. We're in the midst now of this major U.S.-China summit. President Trump arriving our time this morning. Obviously, that's evening in China. And it is already Thursday in China, of course, because they're, I think, 14 hours ahead of us, something like that, 12, 14 hours ahead. And we're going to be watching this very closely. You know, as someone who was born in 1970, it's amazing to me how it feels like the way people understand and look at summits like this has been devalued. As a kid, the U.S.-USSR summits, whether it was Nixon and Brezhnev, Carter and Brezhnev, Ford met with Brezhnev once, and then, of course, Reagan and his meetings, mostly with Gorbachev. I mean, everything stopped. The countdown was in place days before. The nightly news programs absolutely focused on every little thing, because it really did feel like the fate of the world was in the balance every time there was a summit like this. And I don't see why this is any different. You could really argue in a lot of ways that China is a much more formidable opponent to freedom in the world and good things in the world than the USSR ever was, because as much military power as the Soviet Union had, as many client states as it had states that were under its control completely. China has a similar amount of military power these days, but more importantly, it has massive economic power. And while it may not have a Warsaw Bloc or a bunch of countries who are literally openly pledged to the Soviet Union or to China itself in this case, China has so many spheres of influence and so many people and nations and entities beholden to them. And we're finding that out on the eve of this summit. You know, I got to talk about this. And I know that people, I'm looking at Marco Rubio speaking on Air Force One a little earlier today. Everyone's in this administration is trying to talk a conciliatory game. We want to work with the Chinese. We want to be that. We don't want to be enemies with them. And I understand why that's what you want to say. But China has been at active war with the United States for quite some time. And a big part of that war is espionage, blackmail, and the buying and selling of our politicians. Just in the last few days, we've started to peel back what I think is a very, very large curtain. I mean, it's like I'm grabbing a remote control right here, you know, like those remote control powered curtains. And I just press the button to open that curtain, and it's opening up slowly, but you can tell there's a big reveal, a really big reveal behind that curtain, a really big one. And what's behind that curtain is we're just starting to get a glimpse of it. So we had the mayor of Arcadia, which is a suburb of Los Angeles, wealthy suburb, Eileen Wong, resigning and admitting she was an agent for China. She was doing their bidding. This isn't a case of someone getting campaign donations through Act Blue and some other money laundering organization, and it's a scandal that they received foreign donations to their political campaign, which you're not allowed to do in this country, but boy, is it easy to get around that. No, this is someone who's saying that she was doing China's bidding. And it doesn't end with her. She was friends with Congresswoman Judy Chu. And Judy Chu has many ties to the Chinese communist regime. And she has ties. She was friends with Fang Fang, who had that affair with Eric Swalwell. And if Eric Swalwell isn't compromised by China, whether it's by blackmail or money, I'd be shocked. And then we have this, it's not just politicians. We've just learned in the last few days that the owner of the Milwaukee Bucks, billionaire Wesley Edens, is in a blackmail situation with the Chinese woman. They were both divorced, but I guess she had videos and other incriminating, or I should say embarrassing information about this guy. She tried to blackmail him for $1 billion. She's been charged now, but she was bailed out, and it was a hefty bail. And guess who bailed her out? Agents of the Chinese government. The Chinese government's tentacles are all over this country. They're all over the rest of the world. So they may not have going back to the Soviet era, they may not have a Poland or a Czechoslovakia or all those other countries that used to be in the Warsaw Pact. And there were countries in South America like Cuba who were openly part of a Soviet military alliance and political alliance. It may not be like that. Like we don't have a name like the Warsaw Pact or something like that. But they have countries that are beholden to them. They have politicians that are beholden to them. And I think it answers a lot of the questions that I think a lot of sane Americans must be having. Haven't we all been asking this question in America for the last couple of years? We know about Trump derangement syndrome, and we know it makes people hate, like all things, hatred makes people stupid. So we know that a lot of policies of the Democrats and other opponents of President Trump, including some former Republicans or people who used to be aligned with the Republican Party, we know that their hatred of him has pushed them off the deep end. But that's only a small group of people that we can talk about as far as their policy positions are concerned. There's so many other policies that are clearly detrimental, not just to the United States as an entity, but any civil society, that a growing number of our politicians seem to be endorsing, much to their own personal detriment. What do you gain as a politician if you support cashless bail, letting people out on the streets, even after they've committed multiple crimes? And we see every single day in America. It's rare now where we hear about a murder that wasn't committed by someone who has multiple arrests already. I haven't heard of a first-time offender murder in quite some time. Not a really violent public one. What possible political gain do you get from saying, I want to put boys in girls' locker rooms? Are you going to get a big windfall there at the ballot box? And when you see the extent of the Chinese influence, their financial influence, and again, this isn't just about campaign donations. This is actual good old-fashioned payola. We'll give you this money, and you support this policy, which not only helps China, but remember, it's not just policies that will help China. So it's not going to be people who are going to, for example, vote against a tariff if it ever gets into the hands of Congress, God forbid. Not just people who are going to vote against a military buildup to support Taiwan. But it's also going to be people who are doing China's bidding to undermine this country on its own, whether it has anything to do with China directly or not. So they're going to support DAs who are going to let criminals out on the streets, because that will the destruction of law and order creates so many other problems besides just violence on the streets. Of course, it destroys the economy. It leads to anti-Semitism and bigotry in spades. It does all those things. It doesn't get anybody elected. No one's going to say, I can't wait to vote for the... We've already had some of these lenient DAs, like the one in L.A., lose their elections because of this. But if they're on the take, either on the take or they're compromised by China, then they're going to support these ruinous policies. I grew up in an era in this country, partially in New York. I came to New York around high school time, where not only were both parties trying to eradicate crime, but by the late 1970s, early 80s, they were trying to outdo each other on how great they were against crime. It was not just a bipartisan issue. They were trying to beat each other and prove that they were better for stopping crime. Now, you have people talking about like, well, it depends on who the perpetrator is and who the victim is. That then we'll care. This is political suicide. And the only way that you survive this kind of political suicide is if, I don't know, you cheat on the elections, which we know is happening in large numbers. Or you don't care. You'll be one and done. You'll do one term, maybe two, take your money and go. And we've seen this throughout history. If you think that a mayor of Arcadia or some random Congress people like Judy Chu and Eric Swalwell and a few people here and there, or a billionaire who owns the Milwaukee Bucks is the extent of Chinese buying and selling of prominent Americans, elected and not elected, you're crazy. They've got their hooks into a lot of people, and it does explain, doesn't it, some of these crazy policies. At first, I thought this is just incredible Trump deranged syndrome. Anything Trump says, if he says 2 + 2 is 4, they'll say it's 5. If he says don't cut off your hand, they'll cut off their hands, and they'll be insane. And some of those people who go out to some of these protests and marches and scream are the people who a few years ago were swallowing the Tide Pods. Remember them? So I guess some of that is from that, and I still think that is part of it. But that doesn't explain it. What does explain it is that we have the enemies of this country now who have tremendous influence over a good number of our elected leaders. I think the DNC is completely compromised and bought and sold by the Chinese Communist Party. And there's a good number of Republicans who are too. Just not a significant number. Any number would be unacceptable. They haven't been able to buy and sell the RNC, but at one point they were close. Because in the pre-Trump era of the Republican establishment in this country, when it was basically a Chamber of Commerce operation, China was close to getting that kind of influence. There are still China doves out there, China supporters out there who used to be real Republican cheerleaders, especially for President Bush. Both of them, but especially George W. Bush, who now are the biggest opponents of Trump, out on the social media, on LinkedIn. I see all of them. I used to book them on my Fox Business shows and on my CNBC shows. Republican guys who are all about business and all that, and they hate Trump because China owns them. And these were the same people who used to always say, like, well, let's let China into the world's organizations because that we will influence them. Our freedom and our philosophies and our way of life will open up China. They'll see how we live. And if we don't let them in the club, they're just going to remain this backwater and repress their people. The opposite has happened. It sure as heck looks like a lot of Americans, especially politicians, have looked at China, and especially leftist agitators have looked at China and said, I like that. I'd like to do that too. We don't want freedom. Instead of the United States lifting the cause of freedom in China, China has lifted the cause of repression in America. And anyone who doesn't see that, I feel sorry for you. Or, to be even more blunt, you're really not aware enough to play this game with me and the rest of us who are. The rest of us who are. All right, we're about 12 minutes away from hearing from Roger Stone himself here on the Stone Zone. I'm Jake Novak filling in for him. I want to talk about another major theme spreading throughout America when we come back. It's fraud. And Vice President Vance looks like he's going to become kind of a fraud czar, if not in name, but he's certainly going to do it. We'll be right back with that.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
He likes politics and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone. Where's Roger?
Did you know that St. Luke's University Health Network, based in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, has been recognized by the U.S. government as the highest performing health system in the United States for quality? You heard right. St. Luke's #1 recognition affirms our status as the top leader among the most respected healthcare providers in the nation, including Houston Methodist and the Mayo Clinic. To state it simply, if you want to receive the best care when you go to a hospital, come to St. Luke's.
For the movie Runway with Lady Gaga and rap star Doechii already has over 3 million views.
I'm feeling fab, I'm feeling free, I feel exceptional.
Actor Stanley Tucci, who returned for the second film, telling The Today Show the original movie has had a lasting impact.
So arguably, it has become a classic film, and it endures.
I'm James Flippin, and this is the Worldwide News Network.
Listen to this podcast now
on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Leadership Thread with Dr. Peggy Polonis.
Janice Crampton. Where does the we come from?
The we?
We. Together. We're doing this together.
I think it's more fun. There's a social element to the we. I also think that if you turn back to things such as Clifton Strengths Finder, the team is better when you don't have a lot of the same people.
Download all of Red Apple Media's podcasts right now through your favorite podcast platform. The Stone Zone
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
and I'm Jake Novak filling in for Roger Stone. But Roger will be calling us in about 7-8 minutes, and we'll be talking about the China summit with him. Just letting you know, we are following it very closely. The U.S.-China summit, the two most powerful nations on Earth, the leaders of those two countries meeting in Beijing right now. And it isn't just the political leaders. President Trump bringing along with him Elon Musk, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, which is now the most valuable company in the world, Tim Cook of Apple, Kelly Overton, the CEO of Boeing. I mean, this is a meeting of very, very powerful people right now, and we're watching very closely. Will there be an announcement on tariffs? Will there be an announcement on Taiwan and military things like that? Will there be, although the United States just approved some more sales to Taiwan before the summit? Will we hear some kind of an agreement on the Iran war, even though President Trump said it wasn't on the top of the agenda? A lot in the balance here, and we should be paying as much attention to these summits as we did back in the 70s and 80s when we had U.S.-Soviet Union summits. Absolutely. Just because the mainstream news media, and they're covering it, but they're not making, believe me, if you're not of a certain age, I'm 55, if you're not around 49 to 60 and older, you don't really remember how big it was, these summits with the U.S. and Soviet. And I think we should make them as big as they were then. I really do. Other stories going on right now. Speaking of the Iran war, there has been a big proliferation of those little attack boats the Iranians use to harass traffic in the Strait, and whatever traffic there was going through the Strait of Hormuz is now much deteriorated, although the markets are not upset too much about this. Oil closed quite a bit lower, at least on a percentage basis, than where it was looking to open this morning. We're at the $101 a barrel level right now. We got over 102, I think, at the open this morning. So, not a huge freak out. And stocks closed higher. S&P 500, NASDAQ closing highs again. The Dow was down for the day, but as we look at stock futures, all the stock futures are higher right now, especially the NASDAQ. So honestly, not a lot of freaking out there. A couple of other stories you should know about really quickly. Laura Loomer is reporting, and she's usually right about the stuff that she was reporting. She's reporting that Governor Kathy Hochul of New York is thinking about not having blocking the NYPD from protecting the crowd at the annual Salute to Israel parade in New York. Basically opening the door for radical, riotous, anti-Israel and anti-Semitic group, same thing, attackers to hit this event, which gets usually a couple 100,000 people. It's usually a peaceful event. It's always peaceful. So we'll see if that's true. If this is true, there's no statement from the governor yet, but that would be a big one. And then we have this issue of fraud. Every single day now, the Trump administration is trotting out another fraudulent operation that they've shut down. Maybe they should have done this in the beginning instead of DOJ, and I like the work that DOJ did. But DOJ shut down agencies that they felt, sure, a lot of them were engaged in fraud, like the USAID, but, they basically were looking at waste or duplicities, redundancies, as they say in the corporate world. And that was great. But maybe they should have started with these crazy fraud things, because J.D. Vance, our vice president, announcing today that there's been this massive number of supposedly Medicaid-affiliated healthcare providers in California that they've shut down, and none of them seem to have actually been doing anything about healthcare. Listen to him as he interacts with Dr. Oz.
So, Dr. Oz, I want to make sure I understand this well. So you're saying that we kicked off 800 fraudulent healthcare providers off of the Medicare system, and not a single one of them called the government and said, hey, you made a mistake.
We've had a handful of calls. We're not sure they're legitimate yet, but it's less than 20 out of 800, and we're auditing them.
Unbelievable. So at least 780 are not even trying to claim that they're not fraudulent. And again, those are businesses that we were giving hundreds of millions, in some cases billions of dollars to, not to provide services, but to make a fraudster rich. It's just completely insane.
You know why these government entities are so easy to defraud? Because it's not their money. It's not their money, it's your money, and they don't care. And then if someone really games the system, like an enemy of the United States or people from those countries, they can really go to town. This story is just beginning. All right, when we come back, hopefully Roger Stone will be joining us on the phone. We'll be talking more about this summit. You should be paying attention to it.
The Stone Zone
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
At first, I didn't think it was real. I woke up to this blinding light, and I was transported to another place. Pluto TV. Then I heard a voice.
Come with me if you want to live.
There were thousands of movies and shows, and they were all free. The truth is it's just so beautiful.
On Pluto TV, free streaming of Terminator 2, Fringe, Arrow, The 100, and The X-Files may cause excitement, loss of sleep, and sudden belief in extraterrestrials. No credit cards or alien encounters necessary. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
The Stone Zone. Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And I'm Jake Novak in for Roger Stone, but Roger Stone's on the phone. And Roger, thank you so much for joining us on your show, and thank you for lending me the mic again. And I want to ask you, what are you looking for here? I mean, we're watching very carefully for any developments out of this summit, but I think there are so many major issues here. These are the two most powerful nations in the world, and I mean, you got to think something big's going to come out of this meeting.
Well, I wouldn't want to be sitting across the negotiating table from Donald J. Trump, the master of the deal. What's different here, of course, is that Trump goes into these talks with the Chinese in a very strong position, very much unlike Joe Biden. He's rebuilt our military strength, and they know it. We've demonstrated it in Iran, and we've demonstrated it in Venezuela in terms of the stealth and the strength of our military. And that we've cut off China's access to cheap oil. It's a giant problem for them. It's not that they don't have access to oil, but they don't have access to cheap oil. And therefore, they're at a disadvantage. Military experts I speak to say that the Chinese military is not war ready at this point. And therefore, although they might have moved on Taiwan if Joe Biden were still president, I don't see any circumstance under which they run on Taiwan now. And I think this is important. We're catching up with them in terms of their cornering the market on rare earth minerals. I don't think people realize this, but things like titanium and lithium and other key elements that you need to make batteries or magnets. Your car has 12 different magnets in it, for example. The Chinese have been buying up access to these in Central America, in South America, across Asia, across Europe, and now we're finally competing with them. This is a major initiative for President Trump.
You know, Roger, at the top of this program, I talked about as this summit unfolds, we're starting to pull back the curtain with a little remote control or our hands to see the extent of the Chinese hooks that are in our elected leaders and prominent people. We just had this mayor of Arcadia resign because she admits that she's a foreign agent working for the Chinese. Turns out she's friends with Judy Chu, who was friends with Fang Fang. The woman blackmailing Wesley Edens, the owner of the Milwaukee Bucks, gets bailed out by the Chinese government. I mean, Roger, I think that we have a significant number. If you think that's the end of the list, of course, you know, people got to be crazy. I think there's a significant number of elected leaders and prominent people in this country, let alone the rest of the world, who are beholden to China, and that's not even a conspiracy theory. These people are pleading guilty to it.
No, in fact, they hope to take over America without ever firing a shot. I mean, Jake, you're absolutely right. They have systematically been buying up some of the most prime ranch land, farmland, but it's not just that. They're buying up harbors. They're buying up airports. They're buying up toll roads. They're buying up toll plazas. I mean, they are deeply invested in American real estate. By the way, in Canada, you can't buy land unless you are a native Canadian. But here in the United States, while we have talked about prohibiting Chinese nationals or people who are fronting for Chinese nationals, we've never really done it. It is one of the greatest scandals in the country. But it's not just real estate. They've also infiltrated all strata of American society, whether it's big business, whether it's academia. Let's remember how much they were paying Joe Biden at the University of Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. They had him on the pad for about $1 million. So, yes, I think Chinese infiltration into our country is a very serious, serious problem. But now, finally, we have an acting attorney general and a Department of Justice and an FBI director who are serious about rooting this out. And that is beginning to happen.
You know, listen, you're a political analyst, and you know what messages sell and what messages just fall flat, and you know what messages are political suicide. I'm starting to believe, and I've actually started to believe this a long time ago, that some of these ruinous policies, whether it's like cashless bail, whether it's boys and girls locker rooms, I think this also may be a part of a Chinese influence operation. They're not just buying and selling these members of Congress or DAs or local politicians to help them stop a defense deal for Taiwan or some kind of tariff thing. They also want to destroy us from within. I mean, there's nobody you're a political strategist. What person can really expect to be elected or reelected on some of these crazy policies unless they're being paid to commit this political suicide?
Well, not only that, but I look at it in the reverse, and I've tested this very extensively in polling. The idea of barring Chinese nationals, or, and this is important, anyone fronting for them from purchasing real estate, farmland, ranch land, any real estate at all in the United States, 80% of American voters are more likely to vote for a candidate who's in favor of such a prohibition. But we talk about it, we don't do it. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis signed such a bill with great fanfare until you read the small print. And what it actually says is the Chinese are prohibited from buying land in Florida if it is contiguous to a national security site. Well, what does that mean? I mean, the national security site is not defined anyplace else in Florida state law. So are you saying if it's next to an army base, or if it's next to a military facility, they can't buy it? I favor an across-the-board prohibition. If you can't buy land in Canada unless you're a Canadian, you shouldn't be able to buy land in the United States unless you're an American or an American company.
Yeah, I mean, at least temporarily. I mean, can we see what happens after a couple of years and see and learn from that? I mean, honestly, I think that makes the most sense because, again, what we don't think is sensitive now might turn out to be sensitive later as far as an area of concern. Roger, you're a great expert on President Richard Nixon, and you can't talk about a U.S.-China summit without harking back to his great triumph in 1972, meeting with Mao Zedong and opening up that third avenue for us to really undermine the Soviet Union and find another way. Roger, is there a partner the United States could go to now to help weaken China's influence like we did to the Soviet Union with China? I don't see it, but maybe you do.
Well, first of all, a lot of people will say to me, well, our problem with China today is all due to Richard Nixon. Let's recognize that when Nixon normalized relationships with China, China was a dirt-poor agrarian society where most people didn't even have indoor plumbing. The rural areas had no electricity. Their military was a joke. They had no military capability. They had no technological capability. It's not until President Bill Clinton gives them most favored nation trading status, which supercharges their economy and makes them the menace to the country we are today. So at the time that Nixon recognized China, it was very skillful. He was trying to get a strategic arms limitation agreement from the Soviets. The Soviets were starting to go cold on him. So he said, okay, you don't want a deal? I think I'll go over and see Chairman Mao and see how he's doing. Brezhnev folded, and that's how we got a strategic arms limitation that saved this country literally hundreds of millions of dollars in defense spending. I actually think, and I know I'll be accused of being a Russian spy or a Russian intelligence asset. The Russians have the same problem with radical Islam that we have. And they're actually a natural partner for us in that struggle with Islam. It's why we need to get this war over between Ukraine and Russia, where, in all honesty, the Russians have made it clear from the beginning that NATO membership for Ukraine was a red line in the sand. We are the ones who are violating the Budapest Memorandum, the Minsk Accords, two different agreements signed by George H.W. Bush when he was president, in which we agreed not to push Ukraine into NATO, which is to say, not to put U.S.-funded NATO missiles on the ground in Ukraine pointed at Russia. How is this different than Khrushchev putting Russian missiles in Cuba in 1962? It isn't. So I'm really hopeful the president can bring this war to an end because in many ways we have more in common with the Russians than we do with the Chinese. Those who say Russia is the great threat to America, I don't think so. I think China is the great threat to America.
Well, I think that goes without saying. I mean, even the craziest anti-Trump, Russia did everything to us, Putin, conspiracy theorist people can't possibly think that Russia is more of a threat to us. I mean, again, if they're still sane. Now, a lot of them aren't, and we can't have debates with people who aren't in the world of reality. But that said, Roger, I think everything you said makes sense. But what about the personal angle here? I mean, I'm all about realpolitik, but we are dealing with Vladimir Putin, and let's not even talk about the denigration of him. Let's just talk about it on a regular scale. Is this a partnership that we can trust? Not necessarily because he might not be so trustworthy, but just because of the things you just said. He's already been burned by us a couple of times, right?
No, I thought Tucker Carlson's interview with him was fascinating. A lot of people trashed Tucker for asking him the questions he did, but he outlined the times repeatedly when he would reach agreements with an American president, only to have that American president essentially overruled by the CIA. So our track record is not that great. Now, let's be very clear. I had my Hungarian relatives mowed down by Russian tanks in Budapest in 1956. I'm not a big fan of the Russians. I'm certainly not a fan with their form of government. It is a brutal totalitarian state. And I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin. He's a brutal murderer. But I also think we have to be realistic and recognize that it is China that is buying up this country, not Russia. It is China that poses the greatest danger to us, not Russia.
Why do you think China's been so much more successful at influencing this country than the Soviet Union ever was? You know, the Soviets, sure, you know, we know about some famous double agents here, especially in some of our NATO partners over the years. We know about some of their attempts to undermine our government. And, you know, McCarthy wasn't all wrong. There were a lot of people he was right in calling out. I mean, you know, he went over the top in my opinion, but he wasn't all wrong. But you have to admit that China has been much more. Is it just cash flow? The fact that the Soviet Union, even though it was much stronger militarily, never had the cash flow that China has now? Is that what we're talking about here?
First of all, I think they've been more clever about it. They've been more inscrutable, if you will. They also take a much, much longer view. They're extraordinarily patient people. Speaking about McCarthy, by the way, there's a great book called Blacklisted by History by M. Stanton Evans. And if you'll read it, you'll find out that Senator McCarthy was right about virtually everything he said. The attack on McCarthy is one of the great smear jobs of all time. But the truth is, there were Soviet moles deep within both the Truman and the Roosevelt administrations. And that's a fact, even though many try to say, oh, you're a McCarthyist or McCarthy was a smear artist. No, actually, I think McCarthy got smeared. I recommend that book to you. You can find it online. It's called Blacklisted by History by M. Stanton Evans. Great book.
Yeah. And it started at Los Alamos. I mean, we know that the scientists at Los Alamos developing our nuclear weapon during World War II, there was a significant Soviet infiltration there. And they tried to cover it up for a long time, but they knew pretty early on that someone had ratted them out. And, of course, that led to the Rosenberg. And the Rosenbergs were 100% guilty, by the way. Anyone who says otherwise is completely ignorant. But let's move on to the situation in Iran, with Iran right now. It looks like the Trump administration is comfortable with a waited out stage right now because the Iranian economy is getting weaker by the day. And all I can say is that makes sense to me on paper. But remember, we're dealing with some really suicidally maniacal mullahs in Iran who don't seem to, I don't know if they can be reasoned with. And I'm worried that they're going to be like Hitler. You know, the last thing Hitler did, his final order before committing suicide was to flood the subway tunnels of Berlin because so many Germans were hiding there and trying to survive bombing. I'm not sure that these leaders of Iran right now are going to be okay. I think that they might be okay with their whole country being destroyed and have them go down with them. Can they be reasoned with?
I don't think they can be reasoned with. I think, unlike the Japanese or the Germans in World War II, yes, they wanted to destroy us, but they wanted to survive themselves. These people don't care about surviving. In fact, they think if you're a martyr, you know, you get 17 Vestal virgins. So we're not dealing with rational people here. And the brutality against their own people I mean, I've watched some of these videos. They're just truly, truly shocking. I think now that we have begun, the president has no choice. I would have probably preferred a more strategic approach. In other words, I think you could have kept hitting the Republican Guard, the Iranian Republican Guard, and ultimately the military and the police join with the people. You know, when people have nothing to eat, they do desperate things. They do extraordinary things. I think that unfortunately this is going to take a lot longer than anybody had expected, and the president has done this going into the midterms, which shows that he's putting the interests of the country first. If our intelligence sources tell us that they were that close to a nuclear weapon, and I believe they did, then the president put politics aside and he did what he had to do. It's not a pretty or easy road. On the other hand, this is Donald Trump we're talking about. He doesn't have to run for re-election, and he cares about the country. These people are lunatics. They're truly lunatics, and I don't think he has any choice but to continue to keep hitting them and keep hitting them harder.
Roger, I don't know if you can stick with us we got to take a break, but if you can stick with us till the top of the hour, that'd be great. If not, thank you for joining us. I want to talk a little bit about some domestic elections because you are a political strategist when we come back, if that's okay, starting with what's going on in L.A., if you're okay with that, Roger.
Well, you are on the hottest radio show in America today, so I'm going to stick around.
All right, sounds good. We'll be right back with Roger Stone. I'm Jake Novak. This is the Stone Zone.
The Stone Zone
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Adobe Firefly is the all-in-one creative studio with AI-powered image and video editing for today's creative process. Built for creators of every kind, Firefly helps you generate, edit, and experiment fast. Because the asks aren't getting smaller, the budgets aren't getting bigger, and the timelines, oh yeah, still tight. With all the best creative AI models in one place, Firefly brings your ideas to life. Unlock a better way to make with Adobe Firefly.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And I'm Jake Novak in for Roger Stone, but Roger Stone's on the phone with us right now, so this is still 100% the Stone Zone, and we were talking about how all of us are watching very closely the developments out of China. We're waiting for any kind of announcements, any news out of the China summit between President Trump and President Xi Jinping of China. But listen, I got Roger Stone on the line. We're talking to someone who's a great political strategist, so we got to talk about some of these races. And the races that are really on the horizon right now, really coming up, are these June 2nd primaries in California, the statewide election for governor, and that, you know, they do jungle primaries in California, so everybody runs, no matter what party you are. The top two finishers square off in November. So we've got a very tight race for governor right now. And we have an interesting development now in the mayoral election in Los Angeles, where Spencer Pratt, with these amazing ads that he's doing and media appearances and his fantastic performances at debates, has now jumped into second place. He's now behind incumbent Mayor Karen Bass, 30 to 22%. That's the latest poll I just saw today. Roger, what do you make of Spencer Pratt's methods? Is this the beginning of is he a one-of-a-kind guy, or other people kind of maybe can do this? And can California be saved by these elections?
Well, first of all, something that President Nixon once told me was the only thing worse in politics than being wrong is being boring. And what Spencer Pratt has done here has been very entertaining and very interesting. These online videos that he's made, first of all, they're hysterical. They're extraordinarily entertaining. And you get people's attention, and then you can talk common sense to them. Now, he's running against Karen Bass, an avowed lover of both Mao Zedong and Fidel Castro. Those are her two political heroes, by her own admission, by the way. The jungle system is really not very conducive. Here's what I mean by that. In this particular case, you only have one major Republican running, and the other candidates are all Democrats. So it's not inconceivable that Steve Hilton will run first as the most viable Republican. There's a sheriff running, but I don't see him being a major factor. And then after that, you have a series of Democrats, including Katie Porter. Pardon me. This woman once dumped hot mashed potatoes on her husband's head. You ever notice how the really crazy ones have that look in their eye, that kind of wide-eyed look that AOC has? Adam Schiff has it as well. So does Katie Porter. So I don't think when you get to the general, when the two top vote getters face off, being a Republican gets you into the finals. Unfortunately, being a Republican is a giant disadvantage when you get to the runoff, when there will only be one Democrat. And the state still has a very significant Democrat majority in terms of registration. It's just hard to understand because here you have this beautiful state where the weather is great 80% of the time, and they've destroyed it. And they've literally destroyed it.
And they did it quickly. Roger Stone, thank you so much for calling in to your own show, The Stone Zone, giving me a chance to lend me the mic as well. And thanks for all of your comments and insight. See you tomorrow.
Many thanks, Jake. God bless you.
Thank you.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.